March 31st, 2009. Just before noon, traffic moved steadily along a stretch of highway skirting the outer edge of Dazhou. The road cut through low hills, its guardrails tracing the curve of the slope like a dull silver scar across the landscape. It was not a scenic route, nor a residential one. No shops, no pedestrian walkways, just asphalt, wind, and the constant hum of engines climbing in and out of the city. A grandmother had pulled over because her 7-year-old grandson said he needed to use the bathroom. There was nothing unusual about that decision. She parked near the shoulder, guided him carefully over the low roadside barrier, and helped him down the uneven embankment where the ground dipped out of sight from passing vehicles. The soil was damp from rain the night before. Leaves clung to patches of mud. The air carried that faint metallic scent that lingers after a storm has washed dust from the sky. That was when she noticed the color. Red. At first it looked artificial, almost decorative against the muted browns and grays of early spring. She assumed it was trash, perhaps a discarded plastic bag or an abandoned jacket caught in brush. But as her eyes adjusted to the angle of the slope, the shape beneath the color became clearer. There was a curve where there should not have been one, a contour too symmetrical to belong to debris. She took a step closer. A young woman lay tilted along the incline, her body angled awkwardly as if gravity had positioned her without permission. One arm stretched above her head, fingers resting loosely in her hair. Her face was turned partially downward. Around her neck, a narrow strip of red fabric was wrapped tightly, cutting across pale skin in a stark horizontal line. Her grandson whispered that maybe the lady was sleeping. The grandmother did not respond. Something about the stillness felt deliberate, too complete. Even from a distance, she sensed what every first witness senses in that suspended moment. The awareness that this scene does not belong to ordinary life. She pulled the child back up the slope, her heart accelerating with a clarity that required no confirmation. By the time police arrived, traffic above had resumed its indifferent rhythm. Officers descending the embankment quickly recognized inconsistencies. The ground was soft enough to preserve impressions clearly, and impressions were there, but not the ones they expected. There were male shoe prints, distinct, repeated, and nearby, tire tracks pressed deep into the damp soil, curving in a clean arc as if a vehicle had reversed carefully before departing. There were no corresponding footprints that would suggest the woman had walked down on her own. No scattered debris indicating a prolonged struggle in open space. No signs she had attempted to climb or flee. Her black faux leather jacket lay roughly half a meter from her body, slightly crumpled, positioned in a way that suggested it had been tossed rather than removed naturally. There was no handbag, no identification, no phone. The red strip around her neck drew immediate attention. It was not a scarf tied loosely for warmth. It was narrow, dense, pulled with controlled force, the kind of material designed to withstand tension rather than decoration. Forensic examiners would later determine the cause of death as ligature strangulation. Estimated time of death, approximately 11 p.m. on February 27th. Nearly 38 hours before discovery, but even before laboratory confirmation, investigators sensed that this slope was not the primary scene. It felt too exposed, too transitional, a place chosen for disposal, not confrontation. Then came the detail that complicated everything. Under her fingernails, biological material, and internally a second male DNA source. Two separate men had left traces on her body within the same critical window of time. That fact reframed the narrative instantly. This was no longer a simple case of a body abandoned on a hillside. It was a sequence, an interaction involving more than one male presence in the final hours of her life. Whether those presences were connected or independent remained unclear, but the existence of two profiles suggested complexity rather than clarity. Above the slope, cars continued to pass. Drivers glanced at the cluster of police vehicles and the thin line of cordon tape fluttering in the wind. But none of them knew that the real crime scene might have been mobile, that it might have been confined within a space measured not in acres of hillside, but in meters. Somewhere in the city, perhaps still operating as usual, was a vehicle that had reversed into soft soil 2 nights earlier. A vehicle whose interior may have witnessed the moment when breathing stopped. At that stage, investigators did not know her name. They did not know about the argument that had taken place earlier that evening. They did not know about the convenience store purchase at 9:50 p.m. They did not know which door had closed last before the red fabric tightened. All they had was a body positioned unnaturally against gravity, a strip of red drawn with unmistakable intent, and tire tracks leading back toward the highway. It took several days before the woman on the slope had a name. The identification did not arrive through dramatic forensic breakthroughs. It came quietly through routine procedure. A public notice described the victim's approximate age, height, clothing. A couple in Dazhou read the description and felt something tighten in their chest. Their daughter had not been home. They had assumed she was staying with friends. There had been arguments before. Silence was not unusual. They went to the station together. When officers showed them photographs, the mother hesitated. The swelling around the neck had distorted the face just enough to create doubt. For a moment, she studied the image the way a stranger might, searching for familiarity rather than recognizing it instantly. Then she saw a birthmark on the left arm. That was enough. Her name was Ha Li, 25 years old, married for 2 years, living in an apartment registered jointly under her name and her husband's. On paper, her life was stable, young, urban, ordinary. But stability on paper does not measure tension inside walls. Friends described Ha Li as socially confident. She dressed carefully, spoke fluently, maintained multiple circles of acquaintances. She was not isolated. She was not withdrawn. If anything, she appeared adaptable, comfortable moving between people, conversations, and roles. Yet beneath that flexibility was financial strain. She borrowed small amounts of money from different individuals, not enough to cause public conflict, enough to create quiet irritation. Some said she repaid eventually. Others said she avoided reminders. No single debt suggested lethal motive, but the pattern suggested instability. Her marriage had grown increasingly volatile in recent months. The apartment became the focal point. Although most of the purchase funds had come from her husband, the property was legally shared. When Holly began speaking seriously about divorce, she insisted on dividing it equally. Neighbors later reported raised voices, objects striking surfaces, doors slammed hard enough to echo through the hallway. There had been scratching during one confrontation, visible marks on her husband's arms, a domestic dispute that stopped short of formal complaint. Divorce negotiations transform emotion into arithmetic. Love becomes valuation, and valuation creates fear. Fear of loss, of humiliation, of financial collapse. But her husband was not the only man in her life. Before marriage, she had been involved with Tran Vien Tuan. They separated prior to her wedding, but contact resumed months later. Messages, occasional meetings, nothing openly acknowledged, but consistent enough to matter. In the final hours before her death, that connection would become central to the investigation. Security footage from a convenience store captured her at 9:50 p.m. on February 27th. She entered alone, purchased condoms, left without hesitation. There was no visible distress. No one followed her inside. No sign of coercion. The image would later force investigators to confront an uncomfortable truth. At least part of that night involved a decision she made voluntarily. Forensic analysis confirmed that sexual intercourse occurred prior to her death and that it was consensual. There were no injuries consistent with forced assault during that encounter. That detail reframed her final hours. It suggested that before violence entered the sequence, there had been consent, privacy, intention. But consent in one moment does not guarantee safety in the next. At some point after leaving the apartment she shared with her husband, and after visiting the man she once loved, Holly entered another space, a smaller one, a space with limited exit points and no witnesses. Whatever conflict had begun in her marriage earlier that evening did not end there. It simply became one thread among several. Psychologically, she did not fit a single narrative. She was neither a passive victim nor a manipulative architect. She was navigating overlapping tensions, financial pressure, emotional ambivalence, marital breakdown. Each choice she made that night may have seemed manageable in isolation, a conversation, a meeting, a ride. Investigators, however, were beginning to see that the risk did not lie in any single decision. It lay in the accumulation. The woman found beneath the highway slope had lived an ordinary day until 9:50 p.m. She walked into a store. She purchased protection. She left under fluorescent lights like any other customer. By 11 p.m., she was dead. Somewhere between those two timestamps, something shifted from negotiation to confrontation, from conversation to control. And at this stage of the investigation, the most obvious explanation remained the simplest: the men already in her life. Statistically, that is where most cases begin. But statistics do not account for every door that closes. When the laboratory confirmed two distinct male DNA profiles connected to Hali's final hours, the investigation seemed to narrow with mechanical precision. In cases involving married women found strangled, probability often points inward. Intimate partners, former lovers, unresolved financial disputes. Violence frequently grows from proximity, and in her life, two men stood at the center of that proximity. Her husband was the first to face sustained scrutiny. Vithu Huang admitted that they had argued on the evening of February 27th. He did not attempt to soften it. The subject, he said, was the same one that had resurfaced repeatedly over the previous months. Divorce and the division of the apartment registered under both their names. He had contributed most of the purchase funds. Legally, however, the property belonged to them jointly. According to his statement, the conversation escalated. Voices rose, accusations sharpened. He claimed she scratched him during the confrontation. When detectives examined his hands and forearms, faint scabbed marks were visible. Forensic comparison later confirmed that the biological material recovered from beneath Hali's fingernails matched his DNA. For a brief period, the narrative appeared almost complete. A deteriorating marriage, a financial motive with measurable stakes, physical struggle, DNA confirmation. The structure was clean, understandable, familiar. But murder investigations hinge on time. The estimated time of death was approximately 11 p.m. That same night, surveillance cameras recorded Vithu Huang entering a friend's residential building. He remained there playing cards and drinking with three other men. Each was interviewed separately. Their accounts aligned in sequence and detail. Phone records placed him at the location continuously during the critical window. There was no detectable gap large enough to leave, drive to a remote highway slope, commit a homicide, and return unnoticed. Alibis can be staged, coordinated, rehearsed, yet investigators found no fracture in the timeline. Then there was the 50,000 RMB transfer days before the homicide. On paper, it looked ominous. A large sum moving from husband to another man shortly before his wife was killed. The theory emerged quickly. Perhaps he had hired someone to eliminate the financial burden of divorce? It was a compelling hypothesis. It was also incorrect. The recipient was an older man with a disability connected to a legitimate housing-related debt. No criminal record, no communications suggesting conspiracy, no link to the crime scene. The transaction, once suspicious, dissolved under examination. What remained was a domestic conflict, but not a provable homicide. The scratches under her nails, once interpreted as evidence of a fatal struggle, began to resemble residue from an earlier argument, an emotional clash that stopped short of murder. Attention shifted. Tran Vien Tuan initially denied seeing Hali during the week of her death. That denial did not survive telecommunications analysis. Call data contradicted him. Under further questioning, he acknowledged that she had visited him on the night of February 27th. They had sexual intercourse. It was consensual. She left afterward. Forensic analysis confirmed that the semen recovered from her body matched his DNA. This explained the second biological profile, but it did not explain her death. Timeline reconstruction suggested she was alive when she departed his residence. Surveillance footage in the surrounding area did not capture her returning. No signs of violence were found in his apartment. His vehicle showed no trace evidence consistent with the ligature used to strangle her. The estimated time of death appeared to occur after she had already left him. So why had he lied? Fear, most likely. Adultery carries social consequences. Being publicly identified as the last intimate partner of a homicide victim invites suspicion that can permanently alter reputation. Concealment in this context may have been self-protection rather than guilt. Still, the pattern was troubling. Two men, two confrontations, two instances of dishonesty. And yet neither narrative aligned completely with the physical evidence found on the slope. The body had been transported. There were tire tracks reversing toward the embankment. There were no female footprints descending into the mud. The injuries, impact to the forehead and to the back of the head, suggested collision within a confined space rather than an open struggle in an apartment or courtyard. Investigators began reconsidering the physical dimensions of the crime. If she had been killed during a domestic argument, why move the body so far from the apartment? Why risk exposure on a public highway? If she had been attacked at her lover's residence, where was the trace evidence of cleanup? Where were fibers, blood transfer, structural disturbance? Each hypothesis required additional assumptions. And in investigative logic, the more assumptions required, the weaker the theory becomes. The dual DNA evidence initially thought to simplify the case had instead created distortion. It pulled attention toward intimacy, while the tire marks on damp soil pointed toward mobility, toward a vehicle, toward a space measured not in rooms but in seats. Somewhere between leaving her lover's residence and being discovered beneath that slope, Holly entered another environment entirely, one that left no female footprints outside, a space where doors close from the inside. And once they close, the outside world disappears. At that point, the question shifted. It was no longer which familiar man had motive. It was who drove her into isolation. By the time investigators began to loosen their focus on the two men closest to Holly, the physical evidence at the slope had already been photographed, measured, cataloged, and quietly reconsidered. When suspicion moves away from intimacy, it often returns to geometry, distances, angles, the way bodies fall, the way vehicles turn. The embankment beneath the highway outside Dazhou did not look like a primary crime scene. It looked like a conclusion. The soil was disturbed only in limited areas. There were no wide drag marks suggesting prolonged movement, no signs of chaotic pursuit. Instead, there was a defined arc pressed into the mud where a vehicle had reversed with deliberate control. The tread pattern was clear enough to identify characteristics, though not unique enough to pinpoint a specific car immediately. Investigators returned to the autopsy findings with a different question in mind. Not who, but where. Holly had two notable blunt force impacts, one to the forehead and one to the back of the head. The positioning was unusual. In an open altercation, defensive movement typically produces lateral injuries, scattered bruising across arms, shoulders, torso. Her injuries were more symmetrical, as if her body had been compressed between surfaces. The spacing suggested a confined interior, something like the front seat and dashboard, or the back seat and door frame. Inside a vehicle, a struggle becomes vertical and horizontal at the same time. There is nowhere to fall except into something solid. The red ligature was examined again. It was not a common scarf. It was narrow, durable, designed to endure tension without tearing. A type of hand wrap frequently used in boxing. Fabric wound tightly around knuckles before gloves are worn. Not an accessory most people carry casually, but common for someone who trains regularly. The hypothesis formed gradually. The primary assault did not occur on the hillside. It occurred inside a vehicle parked nearby. The body was then removed and pushed down the slope. The jacket, forgotten or discarded from the seat, followed seconds later. If that theory was correct, the vehicle itself was the first crime scene. Taxi companies in Dazhou were contacted. Larger firms maintain GPS logs. Their vehicles' movements could be tracked and eliminated quickly if necessary. No irregular routing matched the estimated time and location. That narrowed the field to independent drivers, individual operators using personal vehicles for hire. Unlike corporate taxis, many of these cars were not required to carry GPS tracking devices. That gap mattered. Lists were compiled. Dozens of drivers were interviewed. Most conversations were routine. Drivers recalled passengers vaguely or not at all. Night shifts blur together. Faces, fares, destinations. Nothing stood out until something small did. Several days after his initial interview, one independent driver made an unexpected decision. He sold his car, abruptly. No financial distress reported. No prior indication of leaving the trade. Within days, he had shifted to operating a small fruit stand instead. Changing jobs is not a crime. Selling a vehicle is not an admission. But in an investigation centered on a vehicle that reversed into damp soil near a homicide dump site, sudden divestment becomes relevant. The driver's name was Ban Hai-Tu, 35 years old, married, 2 children, no criminal record, physically strong, known to frequent a local gym, amateur boxing enthusiast. The boxing detail did not go unnoticed. Still, suspicion requires more than coincidence. The decisive shift came not from tire analysis or behavioral inference, but from technology. Investigators had been tracing the missing phone belonging to Ha Li through its IMEI number. For a time, the device appeared inactive. Then it connected to a network again, quietly, briefly. The phone was now being used by an older woman. That woman was the mother-in-law of Ban Hai-Tu. The phone had not been destroyed, not dismantled, not discarded in water. It had been absorbed into ordinary life, passed along like a forgotten possession. When officers revisited Ban Hai-Tu, the circle began to tighten. His vehicle model was consistent with the tread characteristics found at the slope. He could not account clearly for certain movements that night. Inside his residence, investigators found boxing equipment, including hand wraps consistent in width and material with the ligature recovered from the victim's neck. At this point, the structure of the case shifted dramatically. The dual DNA profiles that once pulled suspicion toward husband and lover now appeared as narrative noise. Important, but not fatal. They explained earlier interactions, not the final one. The fatal interaction likely occurred after she left the last familiar address. It occurred in transit, inside a car driven by a man who had no prior emotional history with her, no domestic dispute, no shared property, no secret relationship, just affair. The evidence did not yet reveal what triggered the escalation. It did not clarify whether the conflict was financial, emotional, or rooted in fear. But it pointed decisively toward one confined space, one enclosed environment where argument has no exit except a door handle. And if the door does not open quickly enough, tension compresses. By the time investigators were ready to arrest Ban Hai-Tu, the narrative had transformed from intimate betrayal to something colder and more random. Not a premeditated plan, not a domestic conspiracy, a ride, a confined space, a moment that tipped beyond control. The slope beneath the highway had never been the beginning. It had only been the discard point. The real scene was measured in square meters, not acres, and its walls had windows. When Ban Hai-Tu was brought in for formal interrogation, the room felt smaller than it needed to be. He did not look like a man carrying a secret large enough to end a life. He looked tired, controlled, careful with his breathing. His posture was straight, hands resting flat on the table as if posture alone could stabilize the narrative forming around him. Investigators did not begin with accusation. They began with routine reconstruction. February 27th, evening shift, pickup locations, drop-off points. At first, his answers were linear. He had driven multiple fares that night. Nothing unusual. Short distances, normal conversations. He could not recall every passenger precisely. The night had been like any other. Then the phone was placed on the table. Not the device itself. A photograph of it. The serial number enlarged. The IMEI confirmed. It had been recovered from his mother-in-law. There are moments in interrogation where denial fractures, not dramatically, but microscopically. A pause that lasts 1 second too long, a swallow before a response, a recalculation behind the eyes. He shifted in his seat. He explained that he had found the phone inside his vehicle days after February 27th. A passenger must have forgotten it. He had meant to return it, but no one called. Eventually, he gave it to his mother-in-law. It was practical, harmless. The explanation might have survived if the timeline had not already been reconstructed. Call data placed Ha Li's final outgoing signal inside a moving vehicle, consistent with his operating zone. Surveillance footage from a roadside camera captured a sedan matching his model entering a service road near the highway slope shortly before 11 p.m. The vehicle exited minutes later. The pattern tightened. When confronted with the footage, his breathing changed. Subtle but visible. His fingers curled slightly against the tabletop. Investigators shifted strategy. They described the forensic findings without accusation. The blunt force injuries consistent with impact against interior surfaces. The ligature marks matching the width of boxing hand wraps. the soil embedded in the tires of his former vehicle matching the composition of the slope beneath the highway outside Dazhou. They did not raise their voices. Silence does more work than shouting. His first version of events after that silence was partial. He admitted she had been his passenger. She had entered the car alone. She had seemed distracted. During the ride, she received messages. She asked to change destination once. The conversation became tense when discussing the fare. She accused him of taking a longer route. He insisted he had not. Arguments inside vehicles escalate differently than in open space. There is no distance to create cooling time. Words hit quickly. Pride reacts faster. He said she reached toward him during the argument, perhaps to grab his shoulder, perhaps to push. He reacted instinctively. He claimed he did not intend to harm her. He tried to restrain her to stop the movement while the car was in motion. Restraint became pressure, pressure became compression. In confined spaces, strength multiplies. He admitted to wrapping the cloth around her neck. Not with premeditated purpose, he claimed, but as a method to control her movement. A boxing habit, fabric always within reach in his vehicle gym bag. He insisted he had not realized how much force he was applying. Strangulation does not require extended time. Loss of consciousness can occur within seconds if pressure is sustained. Brain injury follows quickly after. He said she stopped struggling suddenly. There is a specific silence that follows violent realization. It is not dramatic, it is mechanical. A recognition that the situation has shifted beyond recovery. He pulled onto the service road, parked, tried to shake her awake. Panic replaced anger. He opened the rear door, dragged her partially. The blunt force injuries likely occurred during those movements, her head striking interior surfaces, then possibly the door frame. He drove closer to the slope, reversed carefully. He removed her body fully and pushed it down the embankment. The jacket fell separately. He did not check her pulse again. Then he drove away. Back to routine streets, back to traffic lights, back to other passengers. When he finished speaking, the room did not change. Investigators documented each statement, cross-referenced each claim with physical evidence. The confession aligned with forensic geometry. The vehicle interior explained the injury pattern. The hand wraps explained the ligature. The tire marks explained the arc in the mud. The phone explained the final digital trace. There was no evidence of prior connection between him and Holly. No prearranged meeting, no history, just coincidence amplified by temper. The case that had initially suggested marital conspiracy and romantic betrayal resolved into something colder. A spontaneous escalation between strangers in a moving car. In court, the narrative would be structured clinically. Timeline, evidence, cause of death, mechanical asphyxia due to ligature strangulation, disposal of body, post-crime concealment through sale of vehicle and redistribution of victim's property. But beneath legal terminology lies a simpler truth. She entered a car expecting transportation. He entered the night expecting income. Neither expected confrontation to cross into fatal force. By the time the sedan reversed toward the dark slope, whatever argument had begun over route or fare had already transformed into irreversible damage. The embankment had not been chosen for symbolism, only for isolation. And isolation, in that moment, was enough. The trial moved faster than the investigation had. Once the confession aligned with the physical evidence, the structure of the case became difficult to fracture. Prosecutors did not rely solely on his admission. They built around it tire pattern analysis, soil comparison, telecommunications data, forensic pathology, the recovered phone traced through its IMEI, and the boxing hand wraps consistent with the ligature marks. Each piece reinforced the others. Remove one, and the framework still stood. In court in Dazhou, Ban Hai Tu appeared smaller than the man described in gym records and witness accounts. The environment of a courtroom compresses strength into posture. He did not contest the core sequence of events. His defense focused on intent, arguing lack of premeditation, emphasizing sudden conflict, emotional impulse, absence of prior relationship. The prosecution focused on duration. Strangulation is not instantaneous. It requires sustained force. Sustained pressure implies awareness. Awareness implies choice, whether to continue or to stop. Medical testimony explained that unconsciousness can occur within seconds. but death requires longer compression. The judge listened without interruption. The courtroom remained quiet in a way that felt procedural rather than dramatic. There were no cinematic outbursts, no sudden revelations, just chronology. Holly's family attended the hearings. They did not speak publicly afterward. Grief rarely translates cleanly into statements. Her marriage disputes, her financial pressures, her private meetings, none of those complexities were debated as moral evidence. They were contextual details, not justifications. The court treated them as background noise against a central fact. She had entered a vehicle alive and exited it lifeless. The sale of the car days after the homicide weighed heavily. So did the transfer of her phone to a relative, rather than reporting it to authorities. Post-crime behavior, the prosecution argued, reflected consciousness of guilt rather than confusion. In its final decision, the court rejected the argument of pure accident. It acknowledged the absence of premeditated planning, but emphasized the deliberate act of applying a ligature and the subsequent disposal of the body. Banzhai Tu was sentenced to death with a 2-year reprieve, a common structure in serious violent cases within the Chinese legal system. The reprieve allowed for commutation to life imprisonment if no further crimes were committed during the probationary period. The sentence was procedural, formal, recorded. But beyond the legal closure, the case left a quieter residue. At first glance, the narrative seemed to warn against betrayal, against unstable marriages, against secret meetings, against emotional volatility. Yet the fatal moment had not emerged from long-term conspiracy or calculated revenge. It emerged from proximity and pride in a confined space, a fare disputed, a route questioned, a tone interpreted as insult. Inside a moving car, dignity can feel threatened quickly. And when physical strength is introduced into that equation, imbalance becomes lethal. The hillside beneath the highway returned to ordinary terrain within weeks. Rains softened the disturbed soil. Tire impressions faded. Grass reclaimed the edges. Drivers continued passing above, unaware of the geometry that had once played out below. Taxi rides in Dazhou did not decrease. People still flagged down cars. Doors still opened. Conversations still unfolded in the narrow distance between front and back seats. But for investigators who worked the case, the lesson was less about fear and more about misdirection. 2 men with emotional history had drawn attention first. DNA evidence had pulled suspicion inward. Financial tension had shaped early hypotheses. Yet the fatal escalation had come from a stranger whose only connection to the victim was temporary transit. Violence does not always grow from long narratives. Sometimes it grows from seconds. Seconds of anger. Seconds of pressure. Seconds in which restraint could have been chosen and was not. Holly's life did not end because of a single argument earlier that evening, nor because of past relationships that complicated her personal world. It ended in the compressed interior of a vehicle where escalation outpaced judgment. The case file would eventually be archived, cataloged among others in the regional system. Dates, names, evidence logs, sentencing documentation. But one detail remains constant in every retelling. She entered the night expecting to arrive somewhere. She never did.